Over the course of 6 seasons of My Hero Academia, Bakugo and Deku's relationship has definitely grown and changed from what it was in the original episodes. In the first episodes, we see a lot of bullying from Bakugo, tearing down Deku, pretty much throwing his notebook in the water, and doing all the awful things that you could imagine. But Bakugo has changed a lot throughout the season, and his relationship with Deku as a rival has definitely blossomed a lot because of that. And in this video, we're going to talk about the day that Bakugo apologized, but to do so, he has to fight Deku alongside all of Class 1A. So we actually get Deku versus the entirety of Class 1A for Bakugo's apology. But to properly get to that, we need to talk about all the bullying that happened in the past. If there was a place that I could say was the beginning of all of this between Bakugo and Deku, I would say it was definitely the moment that Bakugo fell in that stream when he and Deku and his friends were children. Because before this, it seems like they were at least on some sort of good terms, with both of them just being big fans of All Might and being big fans of heroes. But it seems like it was around this point that relationship began to change. In my opinion, I just think that Bakugo didn't want his friends who thought he could do anything to know that he struggles too. So instead of accepting Izuku's help, he starts to bully him and push him away to make the idea of helping Bakugo all that more ridiculous. It's sort of like a "how could you help me" situation, all while Bakugo actually did probably want help in that instance. And if you think about it, that moment at the lake really defines so much about who both Deku and Bakugo are. Bakugo decided to never need help and do everything on his own because everyone in his life expects him to win and do the best. And Deku decided never to give up on someone who needs help, no matter how stubborn they are, even if they're saying that they don't want to be saved. In situations where even the victim has given up on being saved, Deku can see through the complications and all the baggage around the person that he's trying to save, and he still puts his hand out to save them anyway. This situation with Bakugo very much parallels the situation between All For One, Shigaraki, and Tenko, and that's exactly why Deku makes the perfect character to try and save them, because he's the kind of character that tried to save Bakugo. Adding to this, I think it's really tragic that Bakugo went his entire life building up this persona of someone who can do and handle anything, but now in the most recent seasons and in that moment where he tried to save Deku, he's panicking over not being able to protect or help his friend, and because of the secret of One For All and his nature, he's handling it pretty much alone, without really knowing how to, or again being able to, reach out to others to ask for help. It's like Deku saw Bakugo needing help, so he became someone who could save anyone, but doing that ironically led to Bakugo needing help to save Deku. And that has to be really sad, to be honest, because in this video we're going to be talking about a situation where Bakugo needs to ask the others to help to save Deku, but that means at the beginning of everything, he really might as well have just accepted Deku's help when they were kids, instead of pretending to be someone who doesn't need any help. And in that situation, Bakugo didn't let himself be saved, but I hope at the end of the day, Tenko does. So we get through the series, and of course there is that amazing moment of Deku saving Bakugo from the Slime villain, which is going to be an amazing parallel later to Shigaraki and Tenko and All For One kind of death battle between All For One and One For All. So I really like how that moment was very important for the story later on. But in season 6 of My Hero Academia, speaking of that battle between One For All and All For One, we have Bakugo very much getting in the way of the battle of those two quirk users. And this happens as a result of Deku pretty much trying to be as All Might-like as he can, or even trying to be very similar to Bakugo in his attempt to take care of Shigaraki all by himself. And we see that a moment happens where Deku can't react to Shigaraki's attack, and Bakugo actually flies in at top speed to take the attack for Deku, with him saying that his body moved on its own and he now understands to a certain extent what it means to be a hero. After this moment, it seems like Bakugo's explosions are completely different. They have an all-new quality to them, and in the anime, they've been animated to look a lot more rainbow-colored with a lot more sparkles and whatnot, because Bakugo's explosions have gotten so small and micro that you're no longer going to see those big fiery explosions from bigger, less efficient explosions happening in his hand. So Bakugo speeds up and takes the hit from Shigaraki, and that takes Bakugo pretty much out of the fight, injuring him to the point where it looks like he's nearly dead, and that makes Deku get completely enraged and try to take on Shigaraki once again, and we know how that went. Obviously, he went into the quirk tug of war, and then he ended up being out of the fight for a little longer as Deku's body was unable to continue moving. But Bakugo does get back into the fight, picturing that moment where he went to save Deku through using the mental imagery of saving Deku in that moment. Very much like how Deku practiced training One For All by picturing an egg inside of a microwave. But that also makes things very interesting because Bakugo is Deku's vision of victory, and in this situation, you could definitely say that in this instance, it seems like Deku is becoming Bakugo's image of victory. So while it was impressive that Bakugo was able to do everything he did to save Deku in that moment, it actually causes some major problems for Deku and Bakugo's friendship coming up in the next arc of My Hero Academia. You see, after the events of the war arc in My Hero Academia Season 6, we're going to see Deku and Bakugo and a lot of other people in a hospital called Central Hospital. And it's here that we really find out that Deku hasn't actually woken up after the events of the war arc. He's actually in a coma and has not been awoken from that sleep. So what actually happens is Bakugo wakes up first and tries to rush his way over to Deku's room, but no one actually lets him go over there because Deku again is asleep and they don't want Bakugo disturbing him just in case Deku does need that sleep because he's healing. But Bakugo, and I'm sure everyone else, sort of ends up resolving themselves to just talk to Deku after he's woken up once he's better, but that's not actually what goes on because something unexpected to everyone is what happens here. You see, the reason that Deku is in a coma is because he's having a conversation with the various different users of One For All, and he is spending some time in there to have conversations with them and pretty much get the gist of their quirks, but also to confirm to them what his intentions are for Shigaraki in this final arc of My Hero. It's here where Deku realizes the inherent danger of Shigaraki now out in the world because Shigaraki does have the search quirk from Ragdoll in My Hero Academia Season 3, and this means that no matter where Deku is, Shigaraki can hunt him down using the quirk and always be maybe a step away. That's not even to speak about the fact that All For One has broken out of prison, and now there are masses and masses of villains filling the Japanese streets, any of which could also be an assassin trying to take Deku down, or who could take one of his friends or do anything to try to get him to come out and go to All For One. Deku, realizing that this puts all of his friends in danger, actually makes a very shocking decision. For someone who wanted to go to UA his entire life and had no quirk, Deku decides to leave UA and go out on his own to fight all these various different villains from the prisons by himself. Now, it doesn't start off that way because we do see initially Deku is working with various top heroes like Endeavor, Best Jeanist, and Hawks, and All Might even has a little bit of a role to play in this arc, but eventually enough happens, and I'm sure we can detail in another video regarding All For One and Deku, that Deku is extremely worn down and he's separated from everyone more than ever. Deku in this period of the story experiences some of the darkest moments of his life and definitely has some of the lowest lows that I think the character will ever have, period, unless All Might or someone else very close to him ends up dying in the future. But Deku just keeps trudging on, becoming a local legend to the people of Japan who hear about a smoke-covered character who's going out there and taking down All For One's henchmen. Already we've uploaded a video talking about the time during this period where Deku ends up fighting Muscular. It's included in the video that I just uploaded yesterday called The Time That Deku is Pushed to His Absolute Limit, and you can check that video out if you want a little more detail about Deku and his going-ons in this arc, but we're gonna get back to some Bakugo stuff right now, because what ends up happening is that Deku is overwhelmed by a villain. He's just so tired, he hasn't really eaten, he's incredibly sleepy. Deku is just incredibly unhealthy to the point where he's literally about to pass out while trying to fight a full health assassin from All For One. And this assassin's powers, Dictator, is that he's able to control other people pretty much like zombies, but they have full awareness that they're being controlled, even though they can't do anything to stop his control over them. So he puts Deku in a situation where he's like, hey, if you want to get to me, if you want to beat me, you've got to destroy all these people, right? You've got to take down all these civilians who are just being controlled, and Deku is just too worn out to really do anything about this. Thankfully though, we do see Bakugo coming in and hitting Dictator with an amazing explosion that ends up knocking him out pretty instantly, loosening the control over all these people as he finds Deku and notifies the rest of Class 1A that he found the One For All holder. It's here where we get a flashback where we see exactly what happened after Deku ended up leaving UA. And we actually see Bakugo ripping up the note that Deku left him, because Deku did leave everybody notes, and Bakugo begins a meeting with the rest of Class 1A, with him, Todoroki, and Tokoyami being the three that are leading the discussion. And the reason being, again, is because those three worked under the heroes that Deku is currently working with, but they're not answering the phone to confirm their suspicions. So Deku, again, is with Hawks, Jeanist, and Endeavor, but they don't want to answer the students because they know that Deku has a job to do and his friends aren't going to get in his way. This is where Bakugo says when it comes to Deku or All Might, more than Endeavor or anyone else, he knows them best. This is the worst possible scenario that you could think of because everyone is working together to keep Deku away from UA and keep it a secret, and Ochako, having heard enough from this situation and tired of feeling helpless, gets up and says Endeavor is a UA alumni, so let's be a little pushy. So she rushes into Nezu's office and he orders Endeavor to come to his office for some sort of meeting without telling him that it's actually the students who all wanted to talk to Endeavor in the first place. Every single student in Class 1A approaches Endeavor all wearing their ties and their outfit perfectly normal, even Bakugo, who never wears his tie. And this is where Nezu sort of apologizes to Endeavor, saying, hey, I heard what they had to say and I kind of believe in them, so you're gonna have to have this discussion with them. And this is where Shoto gets very direct of Endeavor, going, Endeavor, you're letting Deku and All Might act together, aren't you? Endeavor makes a face and Bakugo takes that face as confirmation, and he says, you don't understand anything about Deku. That damn nerd is insane. He doesn't take himself into account, he always just insists that he's fine. It's the same way All Might became the symbol of peace. We can't stop him. But at the same time, we can't just let things be. We can't just let things evolve as they have been, because then Deku is going to end up exactly like All Might. And understanding the situation and knowing that by this point Deku has actually already left All Might behind and brushed him off, Endeavor actually relents and throws the phone of the GPS location of Deku to the students, who all lunge forward and try to grab him. And this is actually where we find out that the students now know about the secret of One for All, because it's been a couple days, and of course either through Deku's letters or through Bakugo sharing it with them, they all began to understand the responsibility that Deku was under, and maybe one of the reasons why he would have left UA. So Ida steps up and says no matter how much responsibility comes of wielding One for All, Midoriya is their friend, and until they can all smile again together, they can't just be happy knowing that he's walking this troublesome path alone. And this is where Nezu begins to reinforce the plan of the students, telling them, hey, at the end of the day, he is allowed to come back to UA even if he feels like he had to leave for whatever reason, even if he resigned and he left the school, he is a student at UA because as soon as you guys all got those acceptance letters, you became students that we need to protect no matter what. And I really do like that outlook from UA. I wish it just would have came a little sooner because they haven't been the best at protecting their students. And Nezu actually ends up telling the students that if they manage to get Deku back, he'll activate the UA security barrier to make sure that no one can actually get into UA, because they have a massively powerful system that they've never actually activated. They made it for the Culture Festival, but they never actually ended up using it because Deku took care of Gentle so quickly without notifying anyone else that there even was a problem in the first place. This is when we cut back over to the area where now all of Class 1A has joined Bakugo, who found Deku in that odd situation where he's fighting all these different random crowd members who are under the control of Dictator's quirk, and everyone runs off, but we see Deku wondering why the rest of the class is even there. He says he's okay and puts his hood on and begins to try to make his way out of there, and Bakugo, seeing the sorry state that Deku is in, screams, glad to hear you're okay, oh almighty successor of One for All, but after this, do you think you can still keep smiling? And Deku responds that to be able to smile and for everyone to be able to live in peace, he has to keep moving forward and fighting and doing exactly what he's doing, so he tells the rest of the class to get out of his way. As he begins to activate One for All, showing that Deku is ready to do anything to protect his friends, even if he has to run away from his friends and avoid them or beat them down a little bit to keep them away from him. And to Deku saying get out of my way, Bakugo responds, just try and make us, you all might want to be, with the rest of the class behind him getting ready for this amazing fight. Now you wouldn't be wrong for thinking that Class 1A should have absolutely no chance against Deku, but it's not like a straight up death match between them and Deku, because of course Deku isn't actually trying to hurt anyone in the class. Deku's primary goal in this situation is actually to try to run away and get away from them without them seeing where he went, so he can continue going on about his mission of taking down All For One's assassins and eventually finding All For One and Shigaraki on his own. Bakugo continues screaming out loud about the secret of One For All, saying things like, I heard you got the quirks from the 4th to 6th users, and now you look like a completely different person, which to be fair, Deku does in this arc. I can't wait to see how the anime is going to handle this. Deku, I think at this point, realizes that the secret is completely out and everyone completely understands what's going on with him, so he releases the smokescreen, not hiding anything anymore, to make himself not visible from all the different students in his class. And in response to the smokescreen, we actually see Bakugo putting both arms against the ground and releasing a large blast to clear all the smoke away. Now when Deku's in the air, he gets hit by a big wave of birds thanks to Koda's ability. I believe this ability is called Hitchcock Explosion or something like that, but all the birds target Deku and start fluttering and getting in his way, so he can't see properly and can't escape so quickly with his amazing speed. But Deku uses the black whip that he always has activated on his back to attach to a nearby building and tries escaping that way. But that doesn't work either, because Sero comes in wrapping Deku up with his tape and wrapping up the black whip even, completely changing the trajectory of Deku's movement. And this is where Deku starts remembering nice moments that he had with these members of the class, like Sero basically giving Deku tips on how to use black whip by showing him how he uses his tape, or like Jiro, who tries to hit Deku with a heartbeat wall blast from her ears, but Deku very quickly evades it as he remembers how excited Jiro was for the Culture Festival. The moments continue with everyone sharing a moment that they had with Deku where he was really important to them, with Ojiro coming in wrapping his tail around Deku, whipping him around, and Deku slowly trying to break out of it, I'm sure without breaking Ojiro's tail. And for Ojiro, his memory of Deku was Deku getting mad on his behalf at Shinso during the sports festival. Ojiro says he'll never forget that, and he can't overlook the fact that Deku's fatigued fighting alone. And that's when Deku says in response, "But if I'm around, I'll put everyone else in danger." And he begins to flash back again to moments that happened in the war arc, like Aizawa's eyes being injured by Shigaraki, Gran Torino being crushed by Shigaraki, or Bakugo being pierced by All For One Shigaraki's attacks. And that's when Deku probably looks the scariest that he has in this entire arc, as he slowly tries to break out of Ojiro's tail, saying All For One is going to take away everything that I have left if you guys stick around me. And that's when, of course, Tokoyami comes crashing in with his amazing flying speed, sending Deku into a building, giving Deku some tough love compared to everyone else here who hasn't really landed an attack on Deku yet, but attack power is Tokoyami's specialty. Now, as Deku is knocked into this building, he's knocked against a solid surface, and that solid surface ends up transforming into a chair that puts a mask over his face filled with noxious gas to try to put him to sleep. And this was actually made by Momo, saying that our mission is to secure your safety. Deku breaks out of the machine pretty quickly. It doesn't seem like he actually breathes in any of the fumes, but still, Dark Shadow is holding him down as he says, "Please, everyone, stop caring about me and stop following me." And it's from there that we actually see Kaminari getting involved, putting his hands around Deku, saying, "No, we can't stop caring about you. We have no hobbies in common, but you're still my friend, so I'm gonna force you to come back to UA no matter what." Kaminari and Deku get wrapped up in Shoji's arms, which are wrapped in insulation tape from Yaoyorozu, meaning that it seems like Kaminari is gonna try to do some electric bursts on Deku, maybe to take him out and knock him out with his ability. But even further, we see Tokoyami using his Ragnarok ability that he used against Reed Destro in Season 6 to wrap completely around Deku using Dark Shadow to try to turn Dark Shadow into a defensive power to keep something locked in, which was originally Deku's idea in the sports festival. Despite all this though, Deku definitely breaks free from all of their techniques, with even Tokoyami being shocked that Deku was able to break free from his Ragnarok. At this point now, Deku's mask has fallen off, and he goes, "I know everyone's worried about me. From the bottom of their hearts, they really care about me." And I can tell that this is the case because they all should be able to tell the level of danger that there is, but they're also oblivious to it. It's like they're ignoring it because they care about me so much. So please, everyone, get away from me. I swear I'm fine, but I can't take the risk of losing you guys. And as Deku nearly gets away, nearly escapes, speeding through the area at full speed, we see a heaven-piercing ice wall break through the ground and actually catch Deku in midair with a large block of ice. And that would be from none other than Shoto, who says, "What's with that face that you have on right now? If there's a big burden on you, then you need to let us share it, right? Isn't that what you said early on?" Echoing the advice that Deku and Todoroki gave to Ida back during the Stain arc. Suyu comes in saying that no matter what happens with Deku, he's allowed to cry and he's allowed to be scared. He just has to rely on his friends, calling back to the time when Suyu got really scared about everything going on with the students and All For One capturing Bakugo, and she needed the support of the rest of the class around her. She says that Deku is way too important of a friend to let go, and from there we see other students who don't actually have a Momo of Deku in this section dealing with the assassin that All For One has going after Deku. So we have Kirishima, Toru, and Aoyama all dealing with that guy, giving him over to Endeavor. Shoto continues his attack on Deku by trying to cover Deku in even more ice, saying that this whole situation with them fighting Deku all could have been part of All For One's plan, and if Deku isn't careful, All For One could even attack UA right now while they're all after him, but they're not going to give up. So the best thing he could possibly do is to go back to UA and figure out some sort of plan where they defend it instead of being out here and leaving it vulnerable. But in response to that, Deku starts thinking about past battles and past moments, and he screams, "This is a fight between One For All and All For One. You guys can't keep up." And that's where we see Suyu finally doing her part of the plan, where she launches Mineta towards Deku, and Mineta uses a Mineta grape chain to try to lock Deku down to keep him from getting away. But Deku ends up using Black Whip on Mineta, sending him flying as he attaches the Black Whip to different building parts and uses basically his 120% version of One For All, using Fajin and Black Whip to send himself flying even past Ochako, who says that they're not letting Deku go. This is where we see the rest of the class has gathered in one location, and we see a massive ice ramp with some of the students getting ready to boost off of it. And from there we actually see Ashido coat Bakugo in her Acid Man to give him a protective coating as he gets blasted up this ramp using his quirk, and then he meets Ochako in the air, who lowers his gravity, making him even faster. This is when Bakugo uses his explosive speed turbo cluster, a massive spread of cluster explosions that makes him go so fast his skin literally looks like it's experiencing G-force, like when you see in those pilot videos on YouTube. But in actuality, this plan is not for Bakugo to be the one to reach Deku, very similar to the Bakugo Bakugo training section of season 3, Bakugo, like Deku, knows that there's one person in the class who can most reach Deku with his words, and it's not Bakugo. So just like how Deku knew to have it be Kirishima who reached out to Bakugo during that section, Bakugo actually knows that it's gonna be Ida, the class representative, who one can handle the amount of speed that it's gonna take to get to Deku, and two, can actually say the right thing to get Deku to stop. So while Deku is pretty much moving at top speed, the fastest that he possibly can to get out of here, the students are able to pull off a magnificent technique where Bakugo even puts Ida's legs in his explosions and sends him flying, while Ida also stacks onto it his own turbo boost and reaches Deku, grabbing his hand, saying sticking your nose into other people's business is what makes a true hero, reminding Deku again of those words that he said to Ida back during season 2 in the Stain arc when Ida was trying to handle everything alone like Deku is. Ochako releases her quirk so that Ida and Deku don't end up floating off into space, and Kirishima ends up catching Ida and Deku on the ground so they can have a safe landing. This is where Kirishima actually realizes, or at least he tells Deku, that he remembers an old story that was on the news where a kid rushed to save his friend from a villain, and he realizes that that actually was Deku all along, saying that being a hero has nothing to do with being special or strong, it all has to do with Deku's attitude, and he even had that back then. And even here in this moment, even when everyone finally has Deku where they want him, Deku still isn't ringing the tone of wanting to go back to UA. Mina says, come back to us, let's all go back to having classes together. And Deku, stumbling, barely able to stand, says, I'd love to come back, but it's too dangerous. There's a lot of people at UA and I don't want to cause them any trouble. I can't go back to how I was before anymore. And this is where Bakugo finally steps up, and it seems like it's his moment to take the floor. Bakugo goes, do you remember what I told you after Shigaraki stabbed me? And Deku, with his eyes completely whited out, barely conscious, says, I don't remember. Bakugo reminds him that his words to Deku at that time were stop trying to do everything alone, and that before that his body moved on its own when he was impaled, yet he knew that he had to tell Deku those words. It's here where Bakugo starts to explain a lot of things about their relationship to Deku. He says, I always looked down on you just because you were quirkless. You were always far behind me, yet I always felt that you were somehow miles ahead of me. I hated that. I didn't want to feel like that, and I didn't want to recognize that. And as Bakugo is having this conversation with Deku, we see Bakugo and Deku standing in the rain, but their characters are flashing through different ages, with us first seeing young kid Bakugo and Deku, then seeing middle school Bakugo and Deku, early UA Bakugo and Deku, and then them as they currently are right now in the story. Bakugo says, I opposed you and tried to show my superiority over you, but I always lost. After entering UA, absolutely nothing went as I thought it would. I spent all my days trying to figure out your strengths and weaknesses. It probably doesn't mean anything to tell you all this, but that's what I really think. Kind of admitting that in many ways, Bakugo this entire time has been watching Deku closer than anybody. And that's when Bakugo finally lets it out, saying, I'm sorry for everything I've done up until now. And in that moment, it's like the sound of the rain completely stops, as Deku is just completely shocked. Bakugo continues by saying, the path you took as a successor of One For All is exactly what All Might did, so your choices aren't misguided, and your ideals can only take you so far. If you ever run into a road bump or something difficult, you can always count on us for help. And to surpass All Might and be better than him, we all have to work together. It's the only way. And through hearing Bakugo's words about him putting down Deku because he thought he was far behind him, but Deku was actually far ahead of him, I feel like Deku realizes that that's exactly what he's doing to the class, because he realizes that everyone is already far ahead of him in the way that they're thinking about handling the situation. So Deku goes, you guys can't keep up. I'm sorry for saying such a terrible thing. And as he starts to fall over, completely falling down to the ground, Bakugo is there to be his support and catch him, saying, I know. So that's the story of how Bakugo ended up apologizing to Deku, finally bringing their 300-long chapter feud, or I guess rivalry, to an end, and now bringing it to a whole new place where the two can be proud of being each other's rivals. Next up, there's many possible stories that we can cover in My Hero Academia, but you guys can let me know in the comment section below what you want to hear next. After 1,500 likes, I'll get working on the next one, so it's all up to you guys. I'll see you later. It's Pineapple. Love ya. Peace.